All right, everybody. So today we have a new roundtable with myself, Steve Hall, and Abel Chabai. Close.
That was great.
All right. So basically, I've been seeing you guys post pictures, some good progress pictures, and I decided to publicly call you out for your use of steroids. So I kind of just wanted to get you guys to admit it on here for everybody listening.
Yeah.
What's your cycle, Abel?
Was gonna. Yeah, it's Clan and Trend, right? Everybody's on Clan and Trend. That's
No
the
way those
popular thing
abs were
to say.
natty, bro.
Yeah. Those
So-
are hardening drugs.
And
Omar
Steve-
told me creatine was fine. I'm now shocked.
yeah,
What's that
yeah.
about? I thought creatine was natty.
And Steve, even just looking at you, I mean, your face is a lot leaner. What are you down to now?
I'm seeing 180 pounds, so
Okay.
yeah.
That was kind of fast, wasn't it? Weren't you close to 200 not that long
Very
ago?
fast.
It came off. Like, when I say it was not hard, it was not
Yeah.
hard in the slightest. It was just like
Huh.
10 weeks, I lost 20 pounds, and it was just like, that's the easiest cut I've ever done. And it was like 10% of my body weight just came off like that. So
Yeah. Well, I do often hear that from people taking Clan and DNP and stuff. So it's similar experiences. Makes sense.
Was it like a pretty tough cut? Like, did you have to push through quite a bit of discomfort, or because it seems like something that would be appropriate for a mini cut, almost what you did.
It was aggressive. So yeah, I mean, obviously 1% of body weight lost per week, like on average, if not sometimes a bit more than that. But I started it in a position where I was so over food, and actually kind of the cut needed to happen to feel better. So the first like 4 weeks, I was actually feeling better and better. So then it was only really maybe the last couple of weeks where it was like, oh, I'm getting hungry at times, like quite hungry, and I had to start implementing some diet strategies. Got a bit of like hanger coming in, but yeah, for the most part, it was super smooth, and I maintained performance on virtually everything. Only my
Really?
squats have come down like 5 kilos. My bench came down like 2.5 kilos, but like now
awesome.
my body weight to weight ratio is way better on those lifts. So
Yeah. How often did you have to adjust calories?
So I started on like 2,600, and I quite quickly had to adjust down to about 2004, and I think I went down to like 2.2 for a short like 2 weeks, and then I just built them back up as I realized I was losing too quickly.
Wow.
So I have quite an adaptive metabolism. Like, I will adapt down and up.
Same.
So
Same.
yeah, I diet on less than you think I would need to diet on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds about right to me. Are you implementing refeeds there or what?
No refeeds. I had
Really? Okay.
in the first deload, I raised calories by like 500 during the deload, but it was still in deficit for that. But yeah, no refeeds the whole time. It was all just straight linear deficit.
How about if you were to keep pushing to like contest lean, would you start implementing refeeds at that point?
I'm considering it. Because right now I'm basically maintaining for 2 months to try and like build calories back up, rid all diet fatigue, and I'd be ready just way too early. I'm ready. I didn't think I'd look this lean at 180 pounds. I'm kind of like, my mind's a bit blown.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think, especially because obviously Bill Campbell's study just came out, which was pretty convincing, although like there's still people who are speculating that it's adherence, which is interesting to see that that's still a speculation. I guess they weren't in a kind of medical ward or anything like that. They weren't kind of constricted on their eating and such. But yeah,
but
so
in that study, you're referring, that's where they had the 2 day at maintenance.
Yeah.
So I feel like adherence would be a reason why a group maybe lost more weight or lost more fat if there were methods to keep them, to adhere to it more. They lost the same amount of fat and they just maintain more muscle. So I don't really see how improved adherence would apply there.
I'm not sure either. It would. I want to talk to Bill about it, see if he's got any deeper thoughts. I've got him on the podcast in like, I don't know, like 2 months or something. That's the earliest I could get him on. So he's in the diary.
I had Matty Fusaro on recently.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That's probably going to come out this weekend. And he was telling me he was talking to you, Steve. And I thought he meant like for a podcast. And I was like, this is like the 4th time this has happened where we've had the same guy on like within a week or so. And I was like, are you kidding me? He's like, no, it was just a friendly call. I was like, damn right it was.
Matty's a great guy. It's crazy, like almost like having a chat with him since I was following him years ago when he was already like quite big on YouTube, and now, yeah.
So Abel, do you have any refeeds when you got obviously very lean? Did you? Because I assumed, Steve, that you had refeeds at least in your previous contest prep. Maybe. Wow. Okay.
All just I had diet breaks every deload, no refeeds the entire time.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't do any myself, partly because I have my own kind of skepticism with regards to how beneficial they are kind of physically, but I'm definitely one of those for whom it almost tends to do more harm than good from an adherence perspective, which I know is kind of, there are two types of people out there. And I think I heard you guys talk about with Pascal that for him, for example, it is more difficult to get back on track after you have a bit of a deviation. And I'm definitely one of those. So it's almost, for me, I get into that momentum when I'm in that cutting zone. And once I'm in there, it's pretty easy for me to stay on track. But if I deviate or I have a break, it's just so much harder for me to get back on. So once I'm dieting, I am dieting until I am too tired of dieting.
Huh. Yeah, and Steve, you mentioned you had just at maintenance or like a kind of a break when you deloaded. How often were you deloading?
So I only had, in the 10 weeks, I had one at the sixth week. So I had one deload within that diet, basically.
For this one, right?
Yeah.
But for your last contest prep.
Oh, they were basically, every 5th week.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
so
and
I have a whole week at
that's
maintenance.
reasonable.
So it's kind of like, some people do the 2 refeeds in the week. I just kind of like, I'd prefer to save all those up, put them and chunk them as a diet break. So
yeah, I actually do believe that there's tons of anecdotal, but also actual clinical data showing that refeeds can be beneficial. You could make the argument that a lot of times you just had less of an aggressive cut. Like just by having those refeeds in there, the net deficit is going to be smaller, and you could argue that led to more muscle retention. However, I also feel like if you just had a net smaller deficit, you'd probably lose less fat. So I do think the refeeds are doing something. I think more research has shown that these longer breaks, are better. I think meals, like a cheat meal that used to be big, or even a cheat day, maybe psychologically is more beneficial. But I think if you're really looking for, metabolic benefits, you're probably looking at maybe like at least a 2 or 3 day period at maintenance. For me, I actually really do like to have them psychologically, but I would probably agree with Abel there that it can kind of mess with me, especially for me. I definitely have, I've mentioned a few times before, I would say I had a bad relationship with food. I got started in this when I was, young and overweight, and I was doing Body for Life. And in that, they say to have one, whatever you want cheat day. And it was definitely not good for me at that time because, I would literally throughout the week, like save food that I was going to eat on Saturday and like write things down. It was not a healthy mindset at all. And even now, I'll still find myself going back towards those tendencies a little bit, like not much. So I started cutting only about a month, maybe like a month ago, and I'm already down. It was actually like you, Steve, it was pretty quick. So I was like 204, 205, and right now I'm sitting about 196. So 1.5 to 2 pounds a week, and strength has dropped a little bit. I did get like pretty severe food poisoning a few weeks ago, so that was part of it, which was horrible. Don't recommend it. But in general, it's been a fast cut, and I would say the refeeds, I like that, like I can be a little bit more social, I can go out, but there is something to be said for that mindset again and getting back into that. It's almost like if you're in school and it's like the start of the semester, it's like, well, like you have so much school left, you're just in the zone with school. When summer vacation was like, 2 weeks away, it's like you start to zone out. It's like it's coming up, and I think when you have this refeed like on the horizon, you just absolutely are going to start, to varying degrees depending on the person, start thinking about it, start thinking what you're going to have and all that. Whereas if you think like, nope, I'm just cutting now, I think it's easier to kind of like block that out of your mind a little bit and just be like, this is what I'm doing. And obviously there's everything in between too.
Yeah. I actually re-listened to, I don't know why, but it was like 2 years ago. Steve did a Q&A episode with Mike Israetel where they brought up the idea of cheat meals and cheat days and things like that. And Mike gave this amazing monologue analogy about how refeeds could be, or these cheat meals could be compared to kind of the break that people give to whatever spies and things like that that are caught and are being, tortured. And they don't just beat you all the time, but they sometimes wave you that flag of, here's a bit of relief, have a nice meal, have a nice warm bath, and then it's much harder to get back into the tortured mindset afterwards. And I think that just illustrates how this can work so well. So, and I definitely find that to be the case for myself. So it's much easier for me to just put the head down and just accept the cutting process for what it is. But yeah.
Yeah, I know, that's interesting. I mean, I should probably, I'm always reevaluating and trying new things. Even right now, my refeeds are not these like huge days. And I do find that I'm able to get back on track pretty quickly. In fact, I almost look forward to it if I'm really full, and I don't know if it's just age or what, but I definitely can't eat as much as I used to. So before, some of these cheat days would literally be like 10,000 plus calories, whereas, that was normal at one point for me. Nowadays, it might be, 4,000 calories, which is honestly barely over maintenance for me. And then, when you consider, refilling glycogen and the thermic effect of food and increased need and everything else, I really don't think it does much to me, but it is one more day that I'm not losing fat. So I don't think they're as essential as some people make them out to be. But I believe you guys might know, I think Jeff Alberts attributed his success. If you remember, he was competing almost 10 pounds lighter for a long time. And then all of a sudden he was like 7 to 10 pounds heavier. And a lot of people were like, wow, you gained so much muscle even this late in the game. And I already said that this was the case, but he eventually said it as well, that like you didn't really gain that muscle compared to your bulked up self, but you did a much better job of cutting. And I think one of the major things he did was implement refeeds. So I don't know if you guys take note of that or thought about that much, but
it's always tough to tell with these anecdotes because it's like what we talked about, like with the dirty bulk. Like everybody who has a great physique has done a dirty bulk before, but is it what they did or what they didn't do which led to success? So is it the fact that they did the dirty bulk or that they didn't spend years kind of perma dieting, which a lot of people do these days? And Jeff Alberts, he has some pretty crazy stories about the super fast kind of crash diets that he used to do. Like at one point, he lost like 30 pounds in 6 weeks or something crazy. Wow. It's like it's almost like a pound a day or something if you do the math. So it's really tough to tell. Like, was it the refeeds or was it just that he took an overall more intelligent approach when he met the other 3DMJ guys? So
yeah, absolutely. So
I remember. I was just going to say, I remember him saying, it was like his first time he went to stage. He lost a stupid amount of weight in a really short period of time and still did all right. And I think he does. I'm pretty sure I have heard him say he attributes kind of retaining onto more muscle is like he hasn't gained necessarily muscle. It's more so he's retaining it. And he put it down to like, I think I remember him saying length, like he just takes more time, which I think would be included, like refeeds, potentially extend the amount of time that you're actually kind of dieting for.
Yeah, his is, I think, maybe a little extreme with the length. I think part of it, is just he's been doing it for so long. He's like, what am I rushing for? But I don't, I wouldn't tell somebody to take it to his extreme of like 3/4 of a year or something like that. I think that's pretty excessive, and I really don't know if you're getting much of any benefit from that.
When I interviewed him, he agreed. He said he was dieting for too long.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, diving into the original topic here, I actually did want to talk about performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, all of that. So I guess we'll start. Steve, I know, when I first had you on, which is actually significantly over a year ago now, which is kind of wild, we had talked about your brief period of using TRT. You had an accident, so you were on it, and then you came off. I don't know if you've revisited the idea of ever going back on, but for people who didn't hear that interview, could you just kind of tell what your experience was when you started taking something?
Absolutely. So back in, where Revive Stronger comes from, the name is all about this accident that I had where I had the head injury, and it led to a lot of long-term kind of ill health because the head just has the brain in there, and the brain's super important, and it controls many different functions for the body, including hormones. So they think I bruised my pituitary gland, and that had led to very low testosterone levels, and my estrogen was way higher. So I got gyno, and then that was how they diagnosed eventually the low testosterone. And at that period of time, I was not in a good way in terms of my physique wasn't great. Like, I was training super hard, and I was just kind of like not really seeing great results in that regard. But I wasn't really focused on that. I didn't really know what was good and what was bad in that regard.
Yeah.
But I had no libido, low energy levels. I just generally was like not feeling very like virile, not feeling very energetic, and a little bit like depressed. I wasn't diagnosed or anything. So when I then took TRT, which was like a gel, testo gel, I think it was called, to rub on my nipples essentially, the gyno went very quickly actually, and then my testosterone levels kind of went up into normal range. And there are a few things. I mean, it's a long time ago now. It's almost over 7 years, I think, now that since I stopped. In April, it will be 7 years, because then I can compete in the BNBF. They have a strict 7-year rule, and that's the British Natural Bodybuilding Federation. But anyway, so yeah, the immediate things that I can remember was like ludicrous libido, like absolutely insane. Like, I just couldn't keep my mind off that. And like, it was actually to the point of which it was hampering my work because I had to, whatever. And then I had the ability, I grew chest hair again. I started growing a beard again. Like, these are just ridiculously real things that I noticed. And those were the main things that I noticed. And I can't really remember back. And this was the same time I was taking my training more and more seriously. So it must have like helped in that regard. Not that I took it for that reason. And then, I mean, I managed to sustain low levels and coming off it. So the thought of going back, it has crept into my mind, especially because when I was living at home, I still had like sachets left. It was like just lying around my bedroom. I think my mum only recently threw them out. And I was with the like
Mom,
years old now.
What are you thinking, Mom? Yeah, seriously.
But I'm so glad that I never went back, because if I did, then I mean, I couldn't compete, because actually to pass my polygraph, I have to pass it knowing that I took it for medical reasons, not for sport performance reasons, which if I had taken them afterwards, it would have just been for sports performance, because then I realized what testosterone did and what it was used for. So I've certainly thought about it. And then obviously
for the BNBF, you have to, when you even took it, it had to be for medical reasons?
So for the UK DFBA and the MPA, which is like two other bigger federations in the UK, they let me take it so long as I passed polygraph. And they have to word the question specifically for me to be able to pass that, because they asked me, have you ever taken a sports performance enhancing like bad substance? And I would say yes, because I know I have. Right. But if they asked me, have I ever taken something for sports performance, so I would say no, because it was for medical benefits.
Right.
And then I passed the polygraph. It stresses me to this day doing that. Like, I've only done the polygraph once, but it was one of the most stressful things ever. And on show day, it's horrific. Like, you're all turned up and like peaked, and then they're like, now go and strap yourself into this thing and talk for an hour and like sweat your balls off. But anyway, so but unfortunately the BNBF have a strict just 7-year policy. They're just like, no matter what, doesn't matter if you've got doctor's notes, doesn't matter if you pass polygraph, you're not competing. So thankfully, I didn't even realize, but I checked back with my doctor, and then April this year I will have been 7 years free, so I can actually compete later this year with the BNBF, which is great, because I'm hopefully competing this year, so as long as everything goes to plan. But I only revisited the idea when in 2017 I was competing, and like obviously you get low test again and you like just feel down. And at that time I was consulting with Broderick for like peak week strategies, and just like generally talking to him about contest prep, and he's great. And obviously he's just keen on that side. So he was like, have you ever thought about just going back on it? Like, you'd see such much better results. And I was like, so I did seriously like somewhat contemplate it, but I'm so glad I didn't, because especially seeing my physique now and all the investment I made over the last 3 years, it's just like, wow, even though I might not be in the best position hormonally and all of that, you can still do great things naturally. Now, I invested a shit ton into this off season, which probably a lot of people can't even do that, let alone want to do that. But it's certainly something that's cropped back into my mind. And certainly in future, when I'm like, I don't know, in my late 40s, 50s, whatever it might be, it's something that I'd be like, well, if I was ever having symptoms of low testosterone, I know how beneficial this can be. or if I have clients or know people that are suffering low testosterone, I'm not like, I know how bad that can suck and how much of a difference just a small amount, like just these gel sachets that had like diddly squat of testosterone in can just like transform. Like just the fact.
Do you know what your levels went up to?
I can't remember off the top of my head. No, I just know I got into like, I was below normal, like quite below normal.
Yeah.
And then I just came into like, I was in normal range. I don't know where I ended up landing.
So if you were in normal range then, I assume you're in normal range now, naturally. So I guess 2 follow-up questions. One is, did you do anything to kind of get your natural levels back, any sort of like post-cycle therapy? And secondly, how do you feel now compared to when you were on stuff? I'm guessing somewhere in between, but.
So I didn't, there was no post-cycle therapy or anything. It was just stop taking it and let's measure you in like a month and see where you're at. And I managed to sustain low normal levels. Okay. I would attribute being able to do that to weight training and like having a good diet. Like I like to think that that's the reason why. Yeah. It's like nice. I don't know exactly what happened to be able to allow me to sustain low level normals, but now the last blood test I got was like peak off season, like 200 pounds. I'm planning to get one in a few weeks once I've settled into this maintenance, just to see what it is versus that. But yeah, I think I was like mid-range normal testosterone, like maybe slightly into the like lower half of that, but we know that doesn't really make much difference. So I was just ecstatic to see that it was like mid-range. But I know when I diet, even now, the easiest way for a guy, I think, to realize that their testosterone is not in the best place is just libido. It's like the most obvious marker. And now I'm just not as much thinking about that sort of thing as I was when I was peak mass. Yeah. But it's certainly not bad. Like I know I'm not in that like contest prep danger zone of just flaccid.
Was it
and
bad
nothing's
again?
happening.
Was it bad again when you were bulked up?
No, it seemingly was completely fine. And I think actually getting to those higher body fat levels for me was the best thing I've ever done for my testosterone.
I meant, was your libido bad? Like, was it like out of control, like when you were on testosterone?
No, nowhere near that level. Like that was relentlessly like, I don't know if I'm someone who I probably have a lower libido anyway, but it was like night and day difference. It's still, I felt probably my off season amount was like a normal guy amount. Whereas, on the TRT was like 10 times that.
Right. And Abel, I obviously want to get to you as well. I just want to say one thing with, like, you mentioned, when you're 40 plus, if you get low symptoms and everything, you'd be open to it. And that's interesting to me, that some people are very against it just for the sake of being against it. Like when I talked to Jeff, I mean, this was actually just on Instagram, and he said, he was just showing, his natural progress over the years. And I said, would you ever consider it? And he said, no. Or he said, oh, it's like a hard no. And I said, why is that? Even if it was necessary. And the reality is, I don't actually think it's necessary for many people. I think we're definitely in a kind of phase now where everybody's, we want to be optimal and people take it, but most people don't really ever need it. But he was just saying that, like, it's important to him to be able to say that he did it all naturally, even if he had below normal levels, which, that's his identity, and that's cool. I personally don't feel that way. But obviously it's just different perspectives. So, Abel, I know you and I have had a little bit of conversation on the topic. So, my understanding is you've not done anything up to this point, but maybe, you might consider it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have not done anything, obviously, at this point. For me, it's funny, like, it's hearing other people talk about this and what their perspectives has been like earlier. I know a lot of natural bodybuilders. I've heard a lot of them saying that I think everybody considered it at some point. And to me, in retrospect, it's almost interesting for how long I did not consider it at all. Like I just looked at that as something that's just disgusting and wrong and these horrible things that it must be doing to your body. And honestly, it didn't even really cross my mind up until we did this podcast last year, me and my buddy Sotak Andrei with Mike Israetel, when we had this long discussion about PEDs. And they just kind of opened up my eyes to the subject a little bit more. And it made me realize that, yes, this is something that can have definite negative impacts on your health, but it's not necessarily something that's going to have this disastrous impact. So that made me maybe more curious than I was before. And honestly, at this point, I've just been thinking about it a lot more from like an ethical perspective. I like to see things from different angles. And it's just one thing that I always found interesting is the stigma that's around steroids. And if I just scroll through any kind of YouTube comment section, people are accusing others and just have this kind of condescending tone towards gear users. And I just find it very ironic because natural lifters are notorious for looking for all the shortcuts out there. Like, yeah, gear is all wrong. Like that's cheating. That's a shortcut. But at the same time, they will be the first ones to spend hours scrolling through examine.com for all kinds of supplement hacks and whatever. Like, how can I hack my testosterone? But taking a testosterone injection is disgusting and wrong. So I was just thinking about a lot of that. And honestly, at this point, my perspective is that I'm not opposed to it from an ethical perspective. I'm not really opposed to it in any way. The reason why I haven't done anything and why I haven't really taken any steps towards making that a reality is because it's just the Wild West to me out there. Like it's like I can think back to how confused I was about just general diet and training when like something like what's the best rep range. Like now that is a subject that is not something that would stress me out whatsoever. I understand that, okay, any rep range can work fine. 6 to 12 is very practical, but there's nothing wrong with doing 20 reps. It's not like I'm just going to increase endurance and not going to grow muscles. So these questions are like very simple, very clear in my head. But I remember like it's been such a confusing and annoying thing to me that I could not find clear answers to a lot of these things. And I can just imagine if I started out with something like this, I would just have so many questions, probably so many conflicting sources of information out there, people saying different things, and it's serious matter as well. It's not like what's the best rep range. It's like if I'm taking the wrong stuff or I'm not taking these specific precautions, I could be developing like long-term health impact. So it's just a little bit scary to me, and that's why I didn't really I haven't really taken any kind of steps towards making that a part of my life. But if the question is purely, would I ever consider it? Probably I would ever consider it. But it's not something I have done so far and not planning on doing it in the short term, at least. But I find it to be an interesting subject nevertheless.
Yeah, no, it's a great point because as far as like the naturals looking for shortcuts, because I know a lot of people who are natural who would say it's cheating, which I think is silly because like if you're not competing, what are you cheating at? And they'll say like it's like wrong or whatever. I don't know almost any naturals who are adamantly against supplements. Like I don't. And like now, hopefully they realize that the supplements aren't really doing that much in most cases. But yeah, like exactly like you said, people are looking for this, for this, for that. And I would just about guarantee that if there was like a new creatine variation that somehow did XYZ mechanism that inevitably would cause you to put on another 7 to 8 pounds of muscle in the next year, every natural that we know would be taking it. They'd say, oh my God, this is amazing, right? I mean, I'm sure we'd all be taking it. And it's like, so what is the difference? Or what, and creatine is something that's naturally found in your body, like testosterone. So at what point is it this like moral issue for you? Is that it's an injection? Okay, well then how about methyl testosterone that you can take orally? Is it that it's a hormone specifically? Okay, what about vitamin D? There's just like, I don't think there's a clear, people just hear steroids. Part of it's the stigma in society. I think that's a big part of it. And obviously steroids help a lot more than like pretty much any supplement. But as I was just saying, that's clearly not the reason itself, right? Because if there were supplements that were natural, that almost everybody would take it. So I'm not sure where it stems from. I would imagine some of it is a jealousy thing because, and we probably all felt that for sure. We see somebody who looks godlike and, it's kind of like, oh, well, screw you, you're cheating, that's why you look like that, and I can totally relate to that. It's, I mean, I've said so many times on this podcast how I almost feel like bitter towards those people who I didn't know were on steroids when I was a kid because I thought that was realistic. I remember I said, my long-term goal, like my 7 to 8 year goal, was 220 pounds at like 8 to 10% body fat, which I'm literally got to be at least 40 pounds of muscle away from. So, I just didn't know. So that would be my issue with steroids in like culture, I guess, is because of the stigma. Everybody lies about it. And so there's the really, really misguided expectations, of what is possible.
Yeah.
That's my only issue with it is just people not being upfront about it. But even then, I do know people who are on steroids who don't look anywhere near as good as some naturals. So at some point, it's kind of like, does it really matter? I mean, like I have 3 friends at least I know who have taken stuff, and Steve, you would smoke them if you were posing next to them. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's certainly a very interesting topic, but yeah, looks like you're
if I can add one thing is what like that's one ironic thing, the inconsistency and kind of the moral argumentation of a lot of people. But I also find it funny how some of the people like Eric Helms, and like this might be the only time ever that I'm saying something publicly that I like disagree with Eric Helms on, because like he's like whatever up there. But I heard an Iron Culture podcast where they were talking with John Meadows, and Mike Israetel was also there. And Eric kind of opened up the discussion and started off with, I can see how a Mr. Olympia competitor is going to use PEDs, but I cannot understand how someone who is not going to compete and is not really like earning money with this whole thing is like what's the reason behind using it? Like, I just cannot see it. And to me, I mean, and actually I talked about this with Mike Israetel when we did that podcast, the two of us, that, if you think about it, like, why do anything besides just the bare minimum to be like healthy and whatever?
Sure.
Like, yeah, be around like under 20% body fat, eat a reasonably healthy diet, work out 2 to 3 times a week. But if someone like Eric says this, who will starve himself for 6 months to get down to a body fat level, which is like terrible for his quality of life, not super good for general health, compromise relationships, writes a research review, which is about the nitty-gritty details about how to optimize training and bodybuilding, which for most people is not going to be a source of income. Many people who are reading that are not even competitors. So we are all kind of in this industry where we are trying to optimize something and invest a lot of thought into managing something that is really not essential to life. It's just a hobby. So really, is it that different compared to taking something and taking an injection, which is going to make you look a bit more muscular? I don't really think so. In that case, I think the people who are these super nihilistic commenters on YouTube, for example, who will, under every single video or podcast which is discussing training, are just going to comment like, why do any of that? Like, why would you get down below 10% body fat? That's stupid. Like, that's unhealthy. Or, just do whatever you enjoy. Like, you have a 2-hour discussion about training frequency and just do whatever you enjoy. Like, those people actually have a consistent argument, because, the why would you ever take steroids is actually consistent with that message. But otherwise, I kind of see a bit of a, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would
say that?
like a disconnect.
Yeah.
So I'm also admittedly an Eric Helms fanboy, but I would say that I disagree with that as well. I mean, first of all, he's pretty public that at one point he did have a brief stint with steroids. And I mean, it was short, I think he did like 1 oral cycle, but obviously at one point he did find it worth it. And I don't even think he had competed back then, but I could be wrong. Secondly, I think the argument is pretty easy to tear down you did a pretty good job of it, Abel, but also there's just so many things in life that are not optimal to health or not optimal to other things, but you have passions in life, right? I mean, even Steve, when you and Mike were on, we kind of talked about how just being heavier in general is going to be less optimal for health. You're 5'10", being 200 pounds and, carrying, even if it's muscle, is probably not ideal, but is it really taking off much of your life? I highly doubt it. If you look into like maybe what Mike Israetel is doing, yeah, he's probably significantly compromising his health. I don't know if he would admit that, but I'm sure he is. I mean, his BMI has to be like 30 or plus at this point. The supplements he's taking are not good to the extent that he's taken, at least from what I've heard from other people who know him, that it's could potentially harsh. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that because, I mean, he is very educated. His wife is a medical doctor. I'm sure he's getting consistent blood work done. And he has made the calculated decision that, hey, this is a passion in my life. And I'm okay with, more than likely taking off some years at the end of it. Now, I think the issue you can run into is that you don't always know that that's how the trade is going to go. I think a lot of us would say, hey, if I can put on 20 pounds of muscle and instead of living to 92, I'm going to live to 87. A lot of people probably would make that trade. Maybe when you're 85, you might regret it, but I think a lot of us would make that trade. But that's not always how it works out. I knew a guy in Maryland who was like 30, maybe 28 at the time, just got engaged. He died. Was it directly tied to the steroids? Maybe not, but he was big on orals and he had some severe liver issues. I knew another guy who had a low ejection fraction. He came off steroids. His ejection fraction, so for people who don't know, it's just, the amount that your heart is pumping out, went back up. So he's like, oh, I'm fine. Took steroids again, had a heart attack. So he is probably taken off 40 years of his life. He's in his mid 40s now. He's gone into ventricular tachycardia numerous times. His pacemaker saved him, several times. But he has probably taken, not probably, he certainly has probably, unless he can get like a heart transplant, even then, he's never going to live as long as he would have, and he says every day that he regrets it. And I actually still follow his log because it just kind of keeps it in my mind that that can absolutely happen, and it could happen to Mike, it could, he doesn't know. And I think Mike, I don't remember what podcast he was on. It might have been yours, Steve, but he was talking about the level of risk. There's the people who just take a little oral cycle for a music festival and they're probably not doing much versus the people who are at the Olympia, and it all scales, obviously. But man, not everybody who starts taking something knows their predispositions. The guy I just mentioned, he actually had a 1 or 2 clotting factors genetically, but he didn't know it. None of his family had it too, but it never resulted in an issue until he started taking stuff. So you can definitely do things, and it's a topic that I've researched quite a lot. I spent years reading about it, talking to people about it. I read a whole textbook on it. So it's something I'd say I'm actually pretty well versed in. And I think that you can probably do it to moderate levels and be okay. And I think if it's a passion, one of the things that Maddie and I talked about was, the psychology behind it. And I said that my reason would have been not really just so that, that 10 pounds, 15 pounds of muscle is going to really enhance my life, but because it gives me that passion back. If people listen to my podcast, I probably seem kind of nihilistic, because I really don't think that once you've been doing this for this long, very much matters. So to be able to have maybe another 5 years or whatever it is of going in there and hitting weights I've never hit before and just getting that back, that would be my reason to do it at this point. It wouldn't be, for better Instagram pictures or whatever. That to get that passion back, I can very much relate to. And that's why I say, Mike, have at it, and anybody else really, as long as they're educated on the topic.
Yeah.
You can you can basically, it's a really terrible argument, the YOLO argument. But in some ways, you can kind of revert back to that in terms of just quality of life. What is it going to provide you a much kind of higher quality of life? And I think the thing maybe Eric is really picking on is the lack of awareness. Like you just said, people jump on it because their bro offers them it, and they just yeah, that sounds cool. I don't know anything bad that's going to happen from it. The only thing I can say in terms of I have not researched it, my only experience is that the TRT, which is nothing compared to what these guys are taking. Right. But I have a client who he competed naturally, and then after his shows, he just was really not happy, and he was nihilistic, and he was he'd lost all his passion. And I would say, and I can't really speak for him, but I would say he probably jumped the gun and jumped on the gear a little bit without thinking about it properly. But he is a different person. He is just unbelievably happy all the time. He is this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. Yeah. He's constantly Steve, you got to hop on this stuff because it's so good. And yeah, to see the dramatic improvement in his life is incredible. I'm not saying he needed to go on steroids to get that improvement, but it's just saying there's if people have a good enough reason for it, even if they're not competing, he does compete, but even if you're not competing, it might just you may just take a small amount that just allows you to keep progressing in your training. And for us, like just having that in our lives could keep us healthier, could keep us like plugging along longer. And again, you also don't know when life is going to end for you. You can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So yeah, it's tough. And again, the only other perspective I have on this, and it's really interesting to see in the UK, there's a big bodybuilding influence from Jordan Peters. And obviously Jordan Peters is enhanced. In the UK, he can even say it because it's legal here to be taking it. And I know a lot of natural competitors look up to Jordan, look up to all the athletes there. And I think, and it surprised me, and I don't know if it's just my social media feed, but there's a lot of natural guys who have decent potential as well as natural competitors who are going over and they're going on to the enhanced side. It's just very interesting to see. And I think there is once one person does it, it's like, oh, now I'm going to do it. And now someone else is going to follow. So it's just interesting to see those trends and how social media can bridge that gap as well. Because a lot of the time it's just like within a gym or something, because otherwise it doesn't get spoken about.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I think it's just going to become more and more prevalent. You're right. You know, you said you never know when your time's going to come, right? And if I die of the coronavirus, I'm going to be so pissed that I haven't been on trend this entire time.
Oh, fuck. I finally forgot about it for like 20 minutes and it dropped out of it again. Seriously, seriously, every morning. Anyway, I'm not even gonna get into it, but yeah, two things I wanted to add to what Steve just mentioned. One is another reason for me why I would probably not hop on it anytime soon is that I'm not really reading my YouTube comments anymore that much, but I still have like a relatively small following, so it's still pretty like kind of have this community-esque feeling to it, and I still get pretty easily pissed off when I read a comment which is like clearly zero good intentions. It's just there for trolling and for negativity. And I don't know, I would feel like I'm giving such a low-hanging fruit for these people if I hopped on and if I lied about it or if I admitted it. Like either way, it's very easy to attack someone who is on gear. So that's another kind of deterrent for me. But the other thing is just speaking of the nihilistic attitude and the kind of ignorant users is, I don't know if you guys follow this guy called Vitruvian Physique or something like that on YouTube.
Vitruvian Physique. I think you've told me about him.
Vitruvian Physique. Yeah, that's the guy. And I like his videos. He has a cool personality and fun videos. And he had this really long podcast with a former gear user. It had this very dramatic tone, like, okay, this guy used gear before, and he came off successfully, and now he's going to share his perspective. And it was all like this, now we are going to find out the truth. and of course, needless to say, you can already predict, since this is a guy who came off, that it's going to be all about how he regretted ever going on gear and everything. And throughout the whole podcast, it was so clear that this was a guy who had no freaking idea what he was doing. Like he couldn't even properly name the substances that he was using. Like from that one podcast that I did with Mike on this, and like the two podcasts that I listened with Broderick Chavez with, like I understood more about the whole gear topic than this guy who was using gear before for years. It was like, yeah, I tried this thing, and the Igor was asking him, so and what does that drug do? And it's like, honestly, man, I don't really know. It's like, dude, Jesus Christ,
insane. Man. It is insane, man. I have so many people like ask me, like friends who have asked me about it. They're like, oh well, I just had a friend recently message me saying, hey, are there any good SARMs my friend could take? And so all my like research that I did on it was before SARMs were even big. So SARMs is an area I don't really know much about. But I was just like, dude, like if you're just trying to do like this one SARM cycle, you're gonna lose it all anyway. The guy was saying, oh, he never gets side effects. I'm like, how do you know you don't get side effects? Are you saying you feel normal? Because that really doesn't tell you that much. You can literally have like liver failure beginning and feel normal. So it doesn't mean anything. But just in general, what people put into their bodies without, I'm pretty OCD with that. Like I need to know, like I'll like look at everything before I put anything in me. But even this is a absurd story, but I remember seeing, I think I saw it on Instagram or something, and there was a porn star, and he had to inject something for, obvious reasons, performance reasons. And He ended up in the hospital, and the thing is, it's like apparently had to be all wrapped up and everything. And he's like, guys, like, don't ever inject Caberjack. And all the comments were like, maybe you should know the name of the drug before you start injecting it into very important organs. And it was just like, like you just didn't know anything. And I think there's just like a culture of just like you said, Steve, like, you know, friends taking it, I'll take it. You know, he seems fine, so, you know, I'll just go ahead with it. It's kind of amazing to me, but again, just because it's so not how I am.
Yeah, I think strangely, a lot of the people, maybe, I don't know if this is the case, but I think maybe a lot of the people who are drawn to drugs and to taking steroids are the type of people not to think too hard about things. And do have a bit of a reckless side and maybe are like thrill seekers in some ways. And I think that's probably unfortunate because I think all three of us are very much deep thinkers. We wouldn't jump into it without being very educated ourselves. Right. Whereas I think a lot of those, unfortunately, a lot of the steroid users are the type just be like, they literally are like YOLO. And they don't really think about that too deeply. They're just like, fuck it, sounds awesome.
I think I'd also just looking at the psychology. Well, first I was going to say, you know, you mentioned one of the guys who you train is on some, I guess he's just on TRT at this point. And I've had a couple clients who are on it, and I will answer their questions, but I've had actually just recently, but he wasn't the first one. I had people ask if I could prescribe it. And I was like, nice. I definitely cannot prescribe it. But yeah, I've had a few requests, which is interesting, and certainly outside of my scope of practice. But it's funny to get the requests.
That's crazy. Do you want to share your story, by the way, with how Steve and I went through, like how we, like, I don't know, you mentioned just now that you researched it in the past.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Sure. So basically, I was always, like, I never considered it. So I was, as you guys know, I started when I was like 12. And it wasn't even something like I was even open to, you know, like T-Nation would publish articles. And if it was anything to do with steroids, I was just like, no. Like, I mean, I didn't even read it. It just wasn't interesting to me. And then by the time I was like 20, and now I had more friends in college who were getting into lifting, and some people were just like blowing past me. And not even just because they were taking stuff, just they had better genetics. But I had a friend who I had seen, so two of my closest friends actually, before I met them, I saw them freshman year in the gym, and they were, you know, pretty skinny. And I, of course, had like the douchebag mentality of like, oh, look at these skinny kids, you know, like, and whatever. So then, like, by the next year, they were both like my size. And I was like, all right. So the one had just hit like a 225 bench press. And then like a month later, he was doing 225 for 5. And like, I was like, this has took me like a lifetime of lifting. Like, what is going on? So he was taking this like oral compound. So, you know, he was just looking crazy. So that's how I met them. I complimented him, like, hey man, you're looking really big lately. You know, I saw you before or whatever, great progress. And the rest of was history. But as far as like my idea of taking it, I started to look into it because frankly, I got extremely frustrated that, I mean, man, I had been lifting for 7 years and I was 6'1" and 170 pounds. I mean, I have pictures where like, if you look at me, it's like, I don't know if I just had like bottom of the barrel genetics, which was for me, it was weird because I wasn't, you know, I never really tried that hard in sports, but when I tried, I mean, I was good, you know? And so it wasn't like I was just, I mean, you see some people and like, not to like be a jerk, but you see some people and they just seem like extremely unathletic where you're like, man, like, I don't know if this person could put on any muscle, but you know, I really wasn't like that. And I had a, you know, okay build. So I was really just frustrated with it. And I was like, this is not like even close to my goal. So I started researching it. At first it was on forums, and I heard, you know, of course, even with me being a pretty intelligent guy and being well read and all of that, I of course was going to have my biases, right? So I was finding information that was generally, you know, in favor of it. And I guess I had a kind of similar like Eric Helms story in that, you know, I had tried this like oral and it was crazy. So it was very brief. It wasn't even actually, so I basically had the leftover of what my friend gave me. And it was like dramatic. I was like, what the hell just happened? And that was over like 3 weeks. I put on 15 pounds and 1 inch on my arms. Yeah, no, it was amazing. So it was amazing until it wasn't amazing. And so I was like 21, and within the next 3 months, I lost everything, and it was horrible. I mean, there was just nothing I could do to keep it. I was trying to diet as well, which was a mistake, but even if I had not dieted, it just would have delayed the inevitable. You know, and eventually you would have lost it. And especially, so the only way you really don't lose it is if you either do somewhat frequent cycles or you stay on TRT, you know, the whole blast and cruise principle. And those people, like I believe a lot of these guys who are like huge now, who say that they used, like Greg just said, right? I do believe when he says he's just on TRT now, because but he said it himself, if he were to drop the TRT, he might be able to get to like low normal levels, but he would easily lose. He says 10, I would guess more than 10 pounds of muscle, you know. And he obviously has freaky genetics, but I really do believe some of these guys can stay huge on TRT because they're maintaining this oftentimes super physiological level, or at least near that. But if you're not on anything, man, your body gets back, you know, homeostatic mechanisms, it gets back to normal very quickly. So after that, I was like, dude, that sucked. Like I was pretty much exactly where I was when I started. So it wasn't even like some people say, oh, like, you know, you got more, you know, satellite cells now and all this stuff. And it's like, dude, I know so many people who have taken steroids and come off completely, and they look none of my friends who have taken steroids, which is actually quite a few, none of them look any better than they did beforehand. Like literally none of them. So maybe if you've got a guy doing it for 10 years or something like that, or some extended period of time, but the people who think like once you've done a cycle, you know, like to say like Steve, like I don't believe you're anywhere past your natural limit because you did some TRT. I mean, that it's maybe like some haters could say that, like, you know, you were on a lifetime natural. Yeah, well, man, his genetics are something, but but I just don't believe that at all. And it's not just, you know, I think people hear like that one study and they're like, wow, look at that. But I just seen so many cases where that's not the case. So anyway, going back to my story, I was like immediately back to like, not immediately, but within a few months back to like my 170-pound self. You know, everything was the same. And if anything, I maybe was a little bit worse now. And at that point, it was like, okay, so are you going to go full bore or are you going to not? And I mean, I really read a lot of information. And, you know, obviously now I do have the medical background, and I just found everything that I could. And obviously I could find a million stories for or against it. But ultimately, I wanted to be like very preventive and like take note of like my health at that time. So I did get blood work even before that, you know, that little oral thing, and my liver enzymes were like 10 times the upper level of normal. And my endocrinologist was like, you know, he didn't know what I was taking. And I mean, for the record, like this was all like legal at the time. This is when it was pretty much the same time that Eric Helms had done his. You know, that's why I say I have the Eric Helms stories. It's very similar. And he thought, I mean, he was like concerned. You know, he's a 21-year-old kid. Is that what he has, like liver failure or like liver cancer? Like what is going on? So thank God that went away pretty quickly. But basically, I had done a bunch of tests, and when I had done a scan on my heart, they had found that I actually had some cardiomyopathy. And so at that point, it was just like the risk was just way too high. So now, like I've had VO2 max tests, and I test fine. My ejection fraction at one point was like lower, but now it's fine. It's not great, but it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like you have a warning sign right here. Some people don't have any warning signs, you know, but here's something where it's like, and just for people listening who don't know, there's different types of hypertrophy that can happen to your heart. So you can have concentric hypertrophy, which is where the walls thicken. And that is what you typically see with like, you know, heavy powerlifters or people who take steroids. And then you can have eccentric hypertrophy, which is where the chambers dilate. And that's something that you'd see in like endurance runners. So of course, the cardiologist I saw, you know, and actually I said this before, but I had the same cardiologist as LeBron James. So that was pretty cool. So I had, you know, I made sure to have like a very high-end guy. And he had wondered like how much activity I was doing, because my heart kind of looked like the heart of somebody who was an endurance runner. But I knew, so we were trying to decide, was it physiologic or pathologic? And I knew that I really didn't do that much cardio. I mean, I did basic cardio, but nothing crazy. So we figured it's probably pathologic, and you know, they weren't sure why that was the case. But at that point, it was just like, man, like if something does happen, like I know I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And you know, that's probably anybody who anything happens to, right? I mean, I think I'd be fine. I think I could do it, but ultimately, it's like, you know what, maybe I'd get 10 pounds of muscle, but I don't think for me at this point in my life, it would do enough to enhance my life. And I think the potential downside is pretty great. But you know, I'm pretty open about saying that for somebody who's otherwise completely healthy, you know, like Abel, if you said, hey, in like 5 years, you know, I kind of want to try like mild cycles, like I'm not like adamantly against that or inherently against that. You know, it's just for me, I just know that I want to take those warning signs seriously and just say like, look, it's just not worth it.
Sure. Steve, wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that now you're glad that you didn't hop back on another TRT type thing. Would you ever in the future consider dabbling with any of these things? I mean, obviously for you is different now because you basically have a excuse me, a company and a brand based on like natural bodybuilding. So I'm assuming that changes the picture. So maybe you can answer it in light of that, but also like, let's say that was not the case. Would you ever consider it in the future?
It's an interesting question because I definitely it'd be ridiculous not to be able to see the appeal there. I definitely see the appeal. The trouble I think I have is I don't think I'd ever want to go full bore, but the competitive guy in me, like I want to compete. But if I'm not going full bore, then I don't want to compete in like a tested federation and be like, well, these guys could just be taking more. And like, I don't know. I find that difficult. I don't know, like, because I know there's guys that compete who don't take as much as other guys. And like, again, that's another element to it. I get very worried that I get obsessed and I would like, I don't know, potentially go too far with it. And I tend to be very obsessive about different things. So I think I've realized I can be competitive as a natural, and I love that. And so I want to keep that going for as long as possible. And I think if I was going to do something, it would be actually maybe I'd venture into a different sport. I don't know. But again, it's the Revive Stronger is about like bodybuilding, physique sports. So if then the guy behind the brand becomes a CrossFit competitor or something, I don't know how that's going to go down. Not that I could do CrossFit because I just couldn't get into those positions. But likewise, like you said, we are natural, like they're the people we take on. I don't take on people who are on gear. Kind of, he's an exception, the guy that I coach at the moment. So it's a tricky one. For me, it's not. Like I've never even smoked a cigarette, let alone done anything at all. Like I'm just such a risk averse person. So I don't see it happening. But yeah, unless I think for me it would have to be if I was kind of in people around me were on it as well. Like if I had like, I don't know, a training partner and there was someone else and we were all training together, like I could get influenced. And if I felt like, oh, I could be educated, I know exactly what I'm doing, I could see being tempted to go down that route, but I don't see it happening. I think
that's a big factor, actually, like who you're surrounded with, because it's one thing to see people on Instagram and you can kind of just click out of it, or you know, it's not that big of a deal. I worked, so basically, I went college, dental school, residency. So I spent 9 years in university gyms. And so, in most university gyms, 200 pounds is actually like one of the bigger guys there, right? So from like an ego standpoint, I was like, okay, decent. And then I'll go to like a Gold's and it's like, dude, I am literally the smallest person in this gym. Like everyone here is either like genetically gifted or on steroids or a combination. And so right now I go to a gym, actually, and I think both of you guys know Paul Canoe. I think. Yeah. And so I had him on a couple weeks ago, but he's openly enhanced, and I'll admit, like when I see him, I'm like, damn, like it just because like he looks awesome, in person. He's got this tiny waist, balloon muscles, and it is tempting. It's like, man, like, and again, it's not like he and I are like friends hanging out or anything, but certainly just seeing him and talking to him, it's tempting. And I'm sure if I had close friends doing it, I'd be like, man, like I do have a friend who was taking like, more legitimate stuff. He was taking DECA for a while, DECA and testosterone, and he looked awesome. And like we were working out together all the time. And I was like, dude, like what is happening to you? Like this, it's crazy. And so now, but he's also one of those people that now he's not on anything. And he's like a shadow of his former self, so he himself is one of the reasons that like it's just not as tempting, because I see the aftermath of that. But certainly if you're surrounded by it all the time, it's really not surprising that people would be more tempted to go on. There's a huge psychology to all this.
Yeah it's pretty wild, actually, how many times I've been kind of punched in the face in the gym that I'm going to, where there were a couple of guys who were like, you look at them and you're like, like I would not be surprised if this guy was on the juice, but with good genetics, this is definitely possible. Like, and some of them even look the part. Like, they just seem like these more like Mike, for example, Mike Israel. Like, okay, he is kind of a bit too freaking big to be natural, but at the same time, like you can see that even if he was, like, he just has that kind of structure. Like, he has those like short limbs, like he just has that stacked kind of build. Like, he would be a pretty big muscular dude, much more Jeff Nippert, perfect example again.
Yeah.
Like, I do believe he's natural. He looks enhanced for most people, but he's just this short guy, very kind of stacked build. So I have a couple of these guys in this gym, and I've been just punched in the face so many times when I would not see them for a couple of weeks, and they would come back and they would literally be like half the size. Like, it was just a completely different person.
Really?
It's just completely emaciated, just rapid. And, someone doesn't shrink that much just by taking, like 2-3 weeks off. So, and that's kind of one thing that scares me about this whole thing. It's almost like the cheat meal analogy, where you're like preparing to diet and, okay, like I will just have this one last meal, like cheat meal before I go back on the diet. And I would be kind of afraid that would be my mindset if I did these cycles. It's like, I know that I'm going to look like shit from next week onwards. So, I will just enjoy this last week, or maybe I will extend it by one more week. That kind of scares me.
Yeah, when I had Matty on, we were talking about that whole thing, and I think you're right to be like afraid of that, because all of us, I think we're, to some degree, we kind of become perfectionists with this, right? And we see this and we see that and these little flaws. And you're obviously going to have the confounding variable that people who take steroids are probably more prone to be obsessive over like their physique and be unhappy with certain things. But I really doubt that the average steroid user is certainly not happier in life, but even probably not happier with their physique than the average natural. I just know, like for me, for instance, genetically skinny forearms and calves, right? It's like I can literally gain like 20 pounds of muscle and I'll probably still look like I have skinny calves and forearms. So I could, take a boatload of steroids and gain muscle. But I guarantee, just knowing my personality, there's plenty that I would nitpick and not be happy about. Oh man, upper chest is still it's a lagging body part. Man, look at these forearms. Like I don't think it would make me any happier. And then when the use stop, it's like, hey, well, this was on testosterone. Maybe I'll add a little DECA. Okay, well, maybe I can add a little oral here, and that'll help too. And as you said, Steve, like we're competitive, and especially if you're competing and you want to win, it's just like, man, like that's like the Rich Piana story, right? He was actually natural for a while, and he was like, I'm never going to let this happen again. I think he just came in second. Like he just didn't win. And then he started taking stuff and it just got crazier and crazier and he just destroyed everybody. But it's definitely I just don't see like an end point there. Yeah. And I already, just because of some of like the health issues I've run into, I'm probably already about, not dramatically smaller than I used to be, but I would say I have legitimately like 5 to 10 pounds less muscle than I did at my peak. And that already kind of sucks. Like I look at some of like my best photos or my best lifts and I'm like, man, like just to know, like I'm only 28 and I'm like, I see Jeff Alvarez. I'm like, man, this guy, while I don't agree that he's like still really progressing, like from like what we would typically think of progress. I don't think he's really putting on like a lot of muscle or anything at his age now, but to at least be like tied, to at least be like his age and still, believing like you're making some progress here and there. I'm only 28 and I already know that like I'm probably never going to get back to my peak, and that kind of sucks. So to think like, man, I'm going to take gear and be 30 pounds smaller than I used to be, I mean, that would be very, very difficult. And I understand why a lot of these bodybuilders just stop lifting after, because that's got to be very psychologically difficult.
Yeah, sorry, Abel. I was just going to say something I find really interesting actually is, I don't know if there's an influence of what got you into the gym in the first place. Like for me, what got me obsessed was like 3DMJ, Matt Ogus. Like I was just obsessed. Like Matt Ogus was literally the guy. I looked at him, I was just like, he is like so fucking aesthetic. I was like, if I can look like him, my dreams are made. And there were times at which I thought I'd never look like him. And then as I've trained for years and years and years, and like he's got over 10 years of training, I'm coming to 10 years now, and I'm like, holy shit, like I'm nearly like somewhat at a similar level of muscularity and strength and things. It's like, wow, like I can actually achieve all of that. And so I don't even, like the Olympia and the Arnold was on recently, it's not something I'm super interested in. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not a passion of mine. So I don't think I'm driven that route and that way anyway.
Yeah.
And then I think also some people are really driven by competing and winning, and they're really like, I'm ultra competitive, but I'm not fussed. Like where I place, it's not about that for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love just being able to progress, and I can do that as a natural now. So I think people who are really like, I've got to win, or I've got to be really competitive, like you said, Rich was.
Mm-hmm.
I can see why they might then be like, oh, maybe this is the thing I need to make sure that I can win. So yeah, that's the only points I was just, as you were speaking, made me think.
Sure. Yeah. I think I actually do still follow the Arnold and the Olympia. When I was in college, we would watch the Olympia. That was really all I watched. Now, I don't know if you guys watch Nick's Strength and Power at all on YouTube. Obviously, he's got a pretty huge following. I think it's like 800,000 subscribers.
I watched him when he was starting. Like he was the same sort of era as like Matt Ogus and and Natty and everyone. So yeah, Fusaro, I think. And then I lost it all.
Yeah. So do you not watch much of anything on YouTube now?
No.
Except Brains and Games, right?
Podcasts. I literally, that's all I watch. I listen to podcasts. I don't actually watch them very often. I just listen to them. But I use YouTube for some reason.
For whatever reason, YouTube was like the main platform I wanted to be on. At least when I started all this. I don't know if it's because I watch a lot of YouTube. And so now I'm not like necessarily always watching. I might just be listening as I'm doing stuff. But I always said like, the Instagram was secondary. The podcast was secondary. It was like it's the podcast app, I mean. But like YouTube, for whatever reason, was like the main thing I wanted to be on. I guess because I felt like I watched it so much, it was almost like my community. Like I knew all these people in a way, and so getting to talk to them and all of that. But anyway, with Nick Strength and Power, I feel like he is what gives me the interest, because it's almost like he does a good job of like the story behind like these competitors at the Olympia and everything, and that keeps me interested. So it's not that I have any interest in like professional like IFBB pro bodybuilding. It's more, I mean, I do, but not because I'd want to do that. It's more just like the story behind it, seeing like this guy come in looking like this or whatever. But I know like when I talked to Tom Venuto, for example, like a pretty good natural bodybuilder, he said he doesn't, just like you, Steve, he doesn't watch it. He's not that interested in it because it's so disconnected from what he does. And I would say I just watch it purely from an entertainment standpoint, whereas like I feel more excitement, I guess, when I listen to Mass or listen to your podcasts or anything like that, just because it is more relatable. And I at least feel like, especially I don't know if you've met up with many people. Well, I guess you have with the conferences, Steve, Abel. I don't know if you have. But
kind of
a little bit. But like looking at like guys, even like I've met up with Eric Trexler and Greg Knuckles a few times, and it's like, Greg would smoke me on a powerlifting platform. Eric Trexler would smoke me on a bodybuilding stage. But it's nice to see that like they look like normal humans, Like I didn't feel as like if you watch the interviews with me and Eric or me and Greg in person, I don't think that like you'd be like, wow, look at like them dwarf like Dave or anything like that. I think we all just kind of look like normal people, and it kind of makes it feel a little bit more relatable. Like, okay, cool, we're kind of just in this, and you're a little bit better at this, you're a little bit better at this, but like we're all in that same realm versus like, you sit next to like Big Ramy or something. It's like, what is this like cow next to me? It's just.
Yeah. It's been kind of interesting for me to meet some of these guys. So some of them have been like way more impressive than I thought. When I met Mike Israetel, I met Menno, James Krieger, Aragon was there, Berge Fagerli was there at this conference in Amsterdam, and pretty much everybody, including most members of the audience, was like, holy shit, like do these guys even lift? That was my overwhelming experience. Like these look like surprisingly unimpressive. I mean, with some people you wouldn't expect. Like I didn't expect that Ellen Aragon is gonna be this mass monster, obviously. The person was like the most jacked out of all was Mario Tomic. Actually, I don't know if you guys know him, but like
I've met Mario.
I don't know him really.
I have a picture with him. I mean, literally like my arms next to his. It's like a different species almost. It's ridiculous. Right. So that was surprising. But yeah, like back to the. I guess it can be almost more dangerous if you get into the whole gear thing with the idea that this is gonna reignite your passion, because that passion, like that's a finite thing as well.
Right,
you're just gonna get to like a new max pretty quickly, and then again you face the decision of taking more or not. To me, it would almost be like a boob job for a girl.
Yeah.
Which, as you know,
Friends
Dave,
make that analogy all the time. Oh yeah.
as you know, I have very delusional ideas about what real and fake boobs are. But anyway, in insider story. But yeah, like it's to me, when I'm looking at my physique, which was my peak, this really lean condition that I achieved, and I look at it, if someone is asking me like, what would be your dream physique? Honestly, this is going to sound really bad, but I'm looking at my physique, and that's pretty much my dream physique, just a little bit bigger. Like, I'm looking at it, this looks awesome. It's just a tiny bit too small. The other thing that I maybe would hope from gear, if I was to try it, is that maybe I could maintain a condition similar to that and not feel like death. Because honestly, like that was the only time in my life when I took my shirt off and it actually made me happy. Like, there's that age-old saying that being lean or looking good won't make you happy. Well, in those cases, my day sucked because I felt so bad. But when I took off my shirt, like, damn, this is awesome. I loved every moment of those, whatever, 30 seconds in which I was like half naked in front of a mirror. So maybe if I could not feel like absolute shit being that lean, that could be pretty cool. And when I watch a Greg Doucette video, where I don't really anymore, but I used to, and he was like shortly after a contest, like 7% body fat still. And he's talking with his girlfriend, like, hey, so are we gonna go for sexy time? And his girlfriend is like, but we already had sexy time. And it's like, damn it, you're like that when you're that shredded? That's awesome.
So. I know we got to wrap up soon, but just a few points that you made, Abel, almost just put it in like bullet point form. So basically, it's funny to hear some of your comments as somebody who's never done like anything or really even like researched it that much, because I see myself in those comments from like the past. So just real quick, I just want to say on like the meeting people in person, I think you're right, because again, Matty Pizarro, who is friends with a lot of these people in the industry, he said like you'd be shocked to see how like normal a lot of these people get, especially when they compete. I haven't met too many other people, except I met Mike Israel, and even him. I mean, I think we were at a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he had a gi on, so you can't really see much, but he didn't look like this like giant person where like, oh my God, it was like, I'm sure he looked very impressive if he took it off, but I'm just saying size wise, it wasn't like, holy crap. I think Martin McDonald looks like he would be pretty big in person. I don't know, but just looking at his pictures, he looks like he's actually genetically like pretty up there, and he says that. But hearing your comments, Abel, like, this looks really good if I was just a little bit bigger. Like when I was 170 pounds, and I remember like I had a pump on, and I was lean, but at my height, that's pretty skinny. And I remember like looking at it, doing like a most muscular, and I was like, man, like this looks great if I just had a little bit more abs and just a little bit bigger. And like 20 pounds of muscle later, I am equally as dissatisfied with my physique, because you just get used to it, man. Like, I mean, I always said that. I was like, man, like I said to my friend Jimmy, and he's not any more muscular than I am, but just his shapes and everything. Just we've literally at times had the exact same measurements, like arm measurements, thigh, waist, and somehow he just looks so much better. But I remember seeing, I was like, man, if I looked like that, I wouldn't even be considering gear. But then it's like you get up at that body weight, and you still do. You just get used to it. And if you were that lean all the time, Abel, as lean as like when you were saying like this is cool, if you were that lean for like 2 years and that just became your norm, you'd probably find new things that kind of bothered you. Maybe, I just don't have this striation here, or, maybe if I could get this. So not that like you're wrong to like that physique, but as somebody who like had those same thoughts, I don't think it ever really goes away. I think there's always like I could improve this and this and this, and you're just constantly dissatisfied, which brings me to the last point I was going to make, which you said on that passion thing. I agree with you that saying like, oh, steroids will bring back that passion, but only for like a few years maybe, is true if that passion comes from strictly the increases in like poundages or things like, or, increases in arm size. Part of what I meant by that passion is that, but also it's like an entire new area to delve into. And I've heard quite a number of people say this, where it's like, wow, like all that reading, if you guys remember the first couple of years when you got into this, of like how exciting it was to read a new article and find this and toy around with this rep scheme or whatever, and to really believe like it was going to do something, that whole thing exists for people who are like finding new compounds and trying new strategies and timings and things like that. And, again, I'm not saying that's a good route to go down, but it is a whole new avenue of things that you're not familiar with that you can become more and more expert on over the years. So for that reason, I could definitely understand it. And it was, it was disappointing when I kind of found out about my health stuff, where I was like, I just got to cut this off now before it, becomes something I go down.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think part of what you just described there is part of the reason I think I'm even more so that's not something I should do because of already how obsessive I am with everything I already do.
For sure.
And it's nice. Yeah. It's nice actually having periods of time where I don't think about it and I just like do what I've got to do. So I don't, I worry that I'd spend way too much time looking into everything. And I know I absolutely would be that person.
Yeah, I should definitely clarify that I'm significantly happier now or significantly more content that I'm not as obsessive. I know obviously, Abel, your whole thing is sustainable lifestyle. That is a big part of what I preach. And it's definitely nice to have gotten away from that obsessiveness a little bit. So,
yeah. Yeah, just one final thing is like how right you are in what you're saying that you would inevitably find new things that are bothering you. I mean, that is clear to see because all the physiques that inspired me when I was a teenager, like all of them, I mean, Brad Pitt in Troy, that was like the moment in a movie theater when I decided that I'm going to get into lifting seriously because like I have to have that. And now I'm like pretty much bigger and leaner. I mean, not right now, but I was leaner and bigger than he was there. And I look at that guy, it's like, he's not that impressive. Like, does that guy even lift, So it's clear to see just on that, like Jean-Claude Van Damme in Kickboxer, another great example. So you're 100% right.
Mine was Marky Mark. Mark Wahlberg.
Who's that? Oh, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I had
when he did the Calvin Klein advert, so I was just like, "Wow, this guy's jacked."
Wahlberg. I mean, I don't know what he looks like in person, and I think he took some gear for that movie.
I know the one you mean.
What's it called?
Something. I don't know. It's with the
I'm sure, but he actually seems like he's pretty jacked guy. This wasn't what got me into lifting. I was already lifting at this point, but when I was on the wrestling team in high school, this kid took his shirt off and like. It was literally like godlike. I was like, what the hell? Like, it was just, I've never seen anybody in person look like that. And it was fascinating to see him transition into football season because he went from probably like a legitimate 6 or 7% body fat to like 12 to 13. And immediately it was just like, because at the time I just wanted to be lean. So it was like so much less impressive, even at like normal body fats. But I look back at those pictures now, because Facebook friends with him. And I look back at him in high school and I'm like, this guy had to be like maybe 155, 160. It's all, it's all relative. So, all right, guys. So this is a great talk. Obviously, I had plenty to talk about. So, Abel, where can we find more of your stuff?
So now you can actually find me on YouTube if you type in SSD Abel. So you don't have to spell my last name. So SSD Abel, that's my YouTube channel. And now I actually have a website, which is abelssd.com.
How about you, Steve?
So, I'm Revive Stronger on YouTube and revivestronger.com is our website. And I'm Revive Stronger on Instagram as well, which is probably the 3 main places.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.